for working your
Noor,
magic.
I'll jump off now, but it's your show.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jalil, Karim, Nadine, three of my favorite people in health tech, or rather my favorite people anywhere. It's good to see you all. Do you all know each other? Thumbs up, thumbs down. No, you've never met?
I know Karim. But Nadine, never met, actually. We spoke once,
so then,
Nadine, some time ago.
Good one, yes.
I will not ask you to introduce each other. I'll take a minute and introduce each of you. And then we can get straight into health tech in MENA. I think we wasted 5 minutes out of the 30 just trying to figure out how to make this work. Okay, so I'm going to start with Nadine. Nadine Hachach-Haram, founder of Proximie, augmented reality for operating rooms in hospitals, streaming and specialist surgeons around the world. So literally from Cleveland Clinic to Afghanistan to save lives, and then across the UK, entered the US market. I will let her tell you all of her incredible stories. But Proximie is a fantastic company and real innovation from the region, changing the world and saving lives. Jalil, I know Nadine's a tough act to follow, but Jalil, founder of Altibbi, which is, if you think about the region, started as WebMD and all the information on the health side, and then transformed and started adding telemedicine, teleconsultation, medical records, and then soon, if not already live, the pharmaceutical side. So really that whole patient journey, all the way from when you feel sick and you need information through to when hopefully you are feeling better and no longer need the platform, on one platform. Karim, Yodawy, so PBM, so really thinking about pharma in Egypt, 100 million people, and how can we get them the medicine they need, and how can we get the insurers to facilitate that for us and the doctors, and make it easier to get the medicine that you need when you're not feeling well, rather than really have to go to the pharmacy and they don't have it in this pharmacy and they're out of stock in that pharmacy, and go through that patient journey when the last thing you want to be doing is going to pharmacy to start with. So 3 founders that are changing the region, changing the way we think about health tech. I'm going to start off the session and ask some questions, and feel free to put in your questions in the chat. So for those of you that are watching and visiting, feel free to target them to a specific founder or in general at large. So I'm going to start with Nadine, since I introduced you first. Why Proximie, how Proximie, and what was your journey? And I'll caveat before you go in, we're not going to talk about your companies. I think if people Google your companies, they will find so much information. So I'd rather spend the next 22 minutes talking about the journeys as a founder, and kind of how it's always like, you know, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But first, why Proximie?
Sure. I mean, thanks for the intro, Noor, and for your support. I guess it's probably important to start at the beginning. I mean, my background is surgery. I trained as a surgeon. So for over 10 years, I worked as a reconstructive plastic surgeon. My aim, and perhaps that stemmed from me having grown in Beirut during the war, was that I wanted to restore form and function for patients. How can I give them a better quality of life? So for 10 years, I did that largely in breast and pelvic cancer. But like many surgeons before me and after me, we're always looking at how we can continue to make impact beyond the 4 walls of our hospital. So I got involved in global health initiatives. I was traveling probably 6 to 8 weeks every year to different parts of the world to look at capacity building and sustainable models in surgical care. And through that journey, and through many other journeys through my time with medical device companies and others, it just became very clear to me that the reality is that we have a big problem in surgery. There's a high amount of variation quality, variation access, and variation care. Today, 5 billion people around the world lack access to safe surgery, and yet surgery affects all of us. There's a study that showed that in your lifetime, you will have at least 3 to 4 operations in your lifetime, procedures, whatever that may be. And so I still remember that day. It was 2014. I was sitting in an operating room. I was taking a bit of a break. I unscrubbed and sat down and looked around me in the OR. I was fairly exhausted and frustrated. I'd just come back from one of my trips and realized that it almost didn't matter how many trips I made and how much outreach I tried to get involved in. The operating room is a largely analog and manual environment. It's not digitized. We don't capture information in any meaningful way. And we aren't connecting the dots in terms of the knowledge sharing capability. And so I decided at that point that, wouldn't it be interesting if you could create this layer of connectivity around operating rooms all around the world, connecting doctors, crowdsourcing knowledge, and how amazing it would be to create this kind of data web of information around the world. And so that really prompted me to start Proximie, and wasn't looking to set it up as a company initially. And, a few years later, took that leap of faith, and here we are.
Thank you. Karim, I'm going to jump over to you. So, why Yodawy? What made you start this platform? And kind of what was the moment, you remember the moment at which you're like, wait, hold on, I need to do this. I have to do this. It just makes so much sense.
Well, to be honest, it came out of complete coincidence. I'm a computer scientist and engineer by education and training. I spent almost a decade as a management consultant outside of Egypt, and then really kind of around 2016, 2017, I decided to go back and just get involved in the family business. The family business was medical equipment distribution and consumables. And there was also a branch that used to give hospital information systems to public hospitals across the country, public military and police hospitals. And I got the opportunity to see 30, 40 hospitals across Egypt, really across a range of cities. And I think that was the moment where I said, okay, we need to start kind of changing the institutional processes that are here. We need to support the insurance regime kind of taking over in Egypt. And that kind of got me to start engaging insurance companies, thinking about the pain points that exist, thinking about the patient journey. And the kind of the medication epic made a lot of sense. It was a big pain point for insurance companies, and it was a pain point for consumers as well. And this is really how it started initially. And one thing led to another. It started as an ordering platform, moved as a kind of evolved into a full-fledged PBM from there on.
Thank you, Karim. And I think the evolution is something that's super interesting. Jalil, maybe chime in. How did you start Altibbi? Where did it start and how did it grow? How did it evolve? And along that journey, was that what you intended, or did you set out to start something and maybe along the way discover other things? You're still on mute. No, not at all. I just want to hear what you have to say.
Well, what started Altibbi was a surgeon too, Nadine. So that's the common factor here. My father is a surgeon, and he worked a lot with refugee camps all around the Arab world. And he always spoke to me about the healthcare in this region, from lack of healthcare education to lack of access and the cost of access to healthcare. And we set about addressing these points first by the content fact, by providing free content, accessible content to everyone, trying to address the education part. Then along the way, we started adding more and more features as per the needs that we were witnessing from our users. And that's how we kept adding and building Altibbi to become an end-to-end digital health platform.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jalil. So I'm going to pause for a minute and ask you each for just one number. How many years ago did you start your company? Nadine?
My math skills now. I've lost count. Probably, I don't know, 5 years ago? 5 years ago?
Karim?
2 years ago.
And Jalil?
10.
So and these prove a point, right? It's not overnight. It looks sometimes to founders watching that, oh, you started this company and 6 or 12 months later, it's super successful. It's a journey. It can take 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to get to a point where, there's a substantial company, a lot of people, you're running a business with revenues, you're growing, it's fantastic. And you feel like you've accomplished somewhat what you set out to accomplish and it's growing. So on that journey, what were some highs and what were some lows? And if you can't say, what was the 1 or 2 high points where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. It's fantastic. And then, what is one low point at which the morning you woke up and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And if you tell me that those days don't exist, I just won't believe you. So what made that happen where, you're like, I don't want this anymore. And then part of you, that entrepreneur part, is like, no, you have to get up, you can make it happen, you can do it. And but let's start with the highs. Jalil, let's start with you. What was your high along your journey?
Yeah, many highs. This is the beauty of this journey, along with the lows. But maybe I can maybe when we landed the first big insurance company coverage covering 1 million beneficiaries, and that was a big thing that we worked maybe 2 to 3 years about to conclude, and yeah, it was a moment when we said finally, so this is happening.
Where you felt like you wanted to pause and celebrate, but there was that means so much work to be done because of that. I can see all the nodding. Okay, Nadine, your high. What was your high?
I think there's, like Jalil said, I think there's a multitude of highs. I would probably break it down into 3 key factors. I mean, one is building a great team. I mean, getting the chance to bring phenomenal people to join me. And, Noor, a lot of those that have joined me over the last year. That ability to inspire people to leave, pretty stable corporate jobs to want to join Proximie was a huge high for me, a validation of what we're doing. I think second, of course, was market validation as you start to see big companies, big players signing on to this and actually changing the way they do their business because they believe you're disrupting the space and therefore this is the way forward. These are multi-billion-dollar kind of blue chip companies. So again, that added the validation. But then I think the ultimate, that ultimate high goes back to the stories, personal and patients. We have so many stories, and we do try and share those stories wherever possible on Proximie of patient impact, like the mission and vision. And so every week, we share that mission and vision story. Those are the highs that keep us going, because with the highs, there's always lows. But if you have a sustained high of human stories, it's great. And of course, it's never a bad thing to meet Her Majesty the Queen when you get a medal from her. So I think that was a pretty nice day too. So that was good.
Fantastic. Karim, what are some, you're allowed to do more than one according to Nadine.
So several highs, certainly. So like Jalil, the day we closed kind of the biggest insurance company in Egypt to provide medication ordering services for the members with almost 500,000 members roughly. So that was a kind of a great moment and validation. Because I'm a bit of a techie, I guess I get excited about products. So the week we launched our own approvals engine for prescriptions in general, and just kind of the pickup rate and the rate of automation, that was very, very exciting day for me. Yeah, these are the kind of 2 big moments, I would say.
And I think it's interesting, before Karim, I pick on you first to tell me what one of your lows was. But I think it's interesting that for all of you, it was really the revenue growth. And, and it's one thing that we always share with founders as an investor, is your first client is a lot more important than your first investor. It's about revenues, not fundraising. And I think that that's a really important point for other founders to take home. So Karim, what is one of the lows on your journey? Because it can't all be highs.
So many lows. It's
okay, fine. You can talk about 2.
So I think there are 2 types really for a founder. There's kind of one, to speak the doctor's language, kind of one acute event that is a super low, and then there are these events that drag on, that kind of gradually take you down. So kind of the first one would have to be kind of the first time I went to visit the management headquarters of a very well-known pharmacy chain here in Egypt, and just getting in there and just realizing that they're still very underdeveloped in terms of processes, digital infrastructure. Kind of I realized the level of operational workaround we'd have to implement to actually get kind of the kind of experience that we wanted, and that was a low. I thought to myself, okay, if these guys are kind of at this level, then it must be very, very difficult to go to the next place. So that was a defining moment to continue kind of with operational hacks just to get the process going.
And how did you get through your own psyche? So when you hit that and you question, is this even possible? What are some thoughts that you go from there?
So I think part of this, it's hard being a founder. So you need your own strategy and you need to know yourself well. And so really can never make decisions at these times. It's not a good habit to kind of draw conclusions at these lows. But usually my strategy is just to go for a run, to be honest, just clear my head. It's this simple, really.
That's great. Jalil, what's one or two of the lows that you've had on your journey?
Yeah, I can tell you 100 if you want. And go forever. But maybe I remember one of the very first lows was when we started our free Q&A service. We wanted to recruit doctors to participate in answering questions for free on our platform. And we created this beautiful presentation and this beautiful product with a lot of features. And we started visiting doctors. And one of the very first doctors we visited, I went in, I started talking, maybe for half an hour, just pitching and all these things. And this doctor kept listening. And at the end of my pitch, he said, Ammo, you look like a smart guy. Why don't you go out and find a real job? Slap.
So what did you do?
And,
so how did you get over that? Like when you went back to your car, what were you thinking? What did you do? How did you get, or did you just go for a run like Karim does?
I mean, yeah, of course I went for a run after, but at the beginning I had tears, in my eyes. And yeah, you go out for a run, you forget it, you go talk to the next doctor, and it's over.
Yeah. I mean, we have founders that when they come and they say, I can't believe this person said no, I thought they were in, and they're very upset. And I always tell them, I know it's hard, but it's good they said no, because you have to get through 10 no's to get to your first yes. And so at least that's one no done, right? Let's move to the next one. And I think it's part of the journey. It always feels like those moments are defining moments in the journey. Nadine, what are one or two moments that you look back and you say, wow, I'm so glad I got myself through that?
I mean, I think to echo what you're saying, one, we are founders, and that is always a bumpy road. You're going to have the lows, you get the highs, and vice versa. But equally, we've all chosen healthcare, and healthcare is very, very complex. Like in any geography, in any country, it's complex, lots of different stakeholders. So you're always trying to find ways to sort of break through that system. On a personal note, it's very hard sometimes as a surgeon trying to, adopt this new persona as a clinical innovator. It's a new space, and that can sometimes be well received, and sometimes not so well received by your peers. So I think on a personal note, that was something I had to work through in terms of getting people to understand that frontline entrepreneurship is very, very valuable and can make a big difference in healthcare. That was something that obviously is always a hard because you take it personal. And I think the second bit is, thinking through the user base that you're trying to change the behavior. And behavior change is so critical when it comes to healthcare. And so trying to get the many no's as well as the many yeses and living through those and building resilience across that is key. But I kind of read a good book a couple of years ago called Crossing the Chasm. It's really helped shape my understanding. This isn't a personal thing. It's just you're trying to change an ecosystem and doing things differently. And so through that, you need to recognize that not everyone's going to adopt innovation technology at the same rate. So that kind of got me through that bit of the level. But apart from that, fundraising, I'm sure that was fun for everyone, and you'll get a number of no's as well as yeses. So.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about your industry. So healthcare, digital health, the future of all of that. What does the future look like? Are we going to be all wearing these little wristband devices that monitor our every move and tell our doctors before we're even sick and we feel a flu or anything? How far away is that? What are you excited about? So if you're the futurist building the future of health, and especially in our markets, but also globally, what does that look like, 10 years from now, 5 years from now? Because if 10 years ago, someone told me that my phone was going to become my bank, I would have told them that's absolutely insane. There's no way, on so many levels, from security to information to how would I transfer money and so on. And now my phone is my bank. So when I think about healthcare, what does that look like digitally 10 years from now? Nadine, why don't you give us your insights?
I mean, I think what we're seeing, and I had the pleasure of writing out, at least mapping out the future of surgery over the next 5, 10, and 15 years, and we published that at the Royal College of Surgeons. It largely broadly obviously expands into primary, secondary, and tertiary care, and so it interlinks, I guess, what each of us are working on. And largely, we do see a future where healthcare is on demand, digital first, holistic, personalized, integrated, and we do need to see that kind of faster access, effective access. You know, when we look at the story of M-Pesa, such a phenomenal story of how they kind of leapfrogged and drove innovation and disrupted a whole space, and we've all adopted that at pace now. Like you said, we're all banking on our phones. I do see a future, and at least I can speak about the operating room, where in the next 5 to 10 years, every operating room will be digitized, connected, streamed. This elusive veil in the operating room will be relieved, and we'll see a future where data will drive a lot of what we do. So it's an exciting time. There's still a lot of work to do. I think we're in the early stages of it, but I do envisage this very personalized and digital approach to healthcare in the next 10 years.
And so you make it sound like robots without saying the word robots. So will robots replace surgeons? Will an operating room be fully robotized? Or will we still have people in there working with their hands?
On the contrary, I mean, the challenge we have today is that there's a very, very big gap between the number of patients that need care and the number of healthcare workers that can deliver that care. And that gap's going to keep rising. The patients are living longer, they're living healthier lives, etc. So we need to think about how do we bring innovation and healthcare workers. And I use the broad term healthcare workers because it's not just about surgeons, but everyone. How do we amplify and force multiply them? Because at the rate at which we're going, we'll never be able to keep up with that demand. So we need to think about augmenting them, delivering care and decentralizing care, providing digital remote monitoring, tools that will help us facilitate an expansion of the workforce in a way that's not just about human capital, but resources around it as well.
Very cool. Jalil, what are some of your thoughts around what is the future of healthcare in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I second what Nadine just spoke about. I mean, we see populations that are growing massively. If you think about Egypt, it's growing at a massive rate in population and all around the Arab world. And keeping the same traditional approach to healthcare by building hospitals and medical centers will never cut it. It will never achieve and be able to cater to everyone. And the only way to do that is to actually digitize. But the way I see it is that the distinction between digital and physical will become obsolete in maybe 5 years. It will be just an integrated model where physical and digital will be one. It will be a new methodology and a new approach to healthcare at large, mixing the digital and physical and some in the same way, where data is flowing all around and managing and making healthcare accessible and cheaper for everyone.
Great. And I agree. And I think that, we can use a lot of that data to personalize healthcare. So what works for one person doesn't work for others. And the quantum of data available will enable us to identify which solutions work where best. Karim, your thoughts on what does it look like 10 years? And then what does it look like in 20 years, right? So in the year 2041, do we still have doctors? Do machines know more than we do? And do medicines exist, or have we reverted back to holistic therapy and herbs?
So, okay, that's a difficult one.
We're not taking notes. They're just predictions.
Yeah. Let's start with the kind of the demand side and how this would change. And specifically maybe in the Middle East, I think it's interesting that over the next 10 years, the technology savvy generation is actually going to make it into kind of the curve where healthcare needs are significant. So one of the kind of dilemmas that there are now is that the people who are tech savvy are still kind of young and healthy, in my view, whereas the ones who are a little bit older are not as technology savvy, sometimes a little bit more traditional. So over the next 5 to 10 years, this will change, and this is going to drive kind of an exponential kind of growth in my view, which is going to drive a lot of innovative services, whether it's different type of access to primary care or different types of delivery services and so on. On the supply side, I think kind of the long-awaited change would be more on the digital infrastructure side, with more interoperability between different data banks, whether it's a provider data bank or an insurance company data bank. And I think this is what's going to actually drive kind of the next generation of services. And that's very, very difficult to predict. It's still kind of a long way out. I would say definitely in the 10 to 20 year range. I'm not sure it's in the next 10 years. So that's tough to predict. It depends in certain countries like the UAE, they're already kind of quite advanced. In other emerging economies, it's still kind of very, very, very early stage. In terms of medications, or in terms of the kind of the pharmaceutical value chain in general, I would argue that possibly in 10 to 20 years, there will be significantly less retail pharmacies, that's for sure. So the model is becoming gradually kind of, or it's really becoming kind of obsolete over time. I think tailor-made medications and kind of this concept is going to start kind of emerging, where it's kind of really designed for the DNA of a specific person. It's still very, very early stages, but I think these are some of the interesting innovations that are going to kind of kick in the next 10 years.
And so when you think about these medications, do you think that we also start consuming more medication because we're focusing much more on prevention? And so if someone can tell you, you actually have a propensity for this kind of disease or that kind of disease, then you should start these meds much earlier before you're even sick. Do you fear that that might happen, or do you think that that's a long shot?
I think the regulatory environment for pharma companies is still quite strict, and I don't think it's going to become more flexible anytime soon. So that it seems to quite be the opposite from what I can see. And again, the younger generation now is much more health conscious, and so you should expect generally kind of a lower consumption of medications. Now, I don't know if this is statistically true or not, but I think you will have a lot more people who are, I think compliance with kind of prescriptions should go up, so that might kind of drive a reverse effect as well. So difficult to predict, to be honest. I wouldn't be able to tell exactly, but I don't think people will be consuming significantly more medications now.
And I would agree. I mean, I think when we think about, the industry, and we've had with the three of you, the good fortune of working with you on some of these things. When we think about it, the region has 1.3 doctors per 1,000 people, whereas Europe sits at 4.8 doctors per 1,000. I mean, for the purpose of the audience, those numbers are, not incremental, they're exponential. Those problems, as all of you mentioned, are not going to be solved by graduating more surgeons, building more pharmacies, or even enabling us to graduate more doctors. It's really going to be digital. And we expect that leapfrogging to be very similar to the fintech leapfrogging that we saw 10 years ago that enabled financial inclusion. So when we think about healthcare inclusion, we think of it as very much regulator, as you mentioned, Karim, and then we think about it as payer, so the insurance companies. And I think it was ironic how you mentioned, one of your largest clients signs on board. It's an insurance company, and that makes your day. And then there's the patient, who is ultimately the consumer. And so what COVID, in our opinion as investors, has done is it's moved all of them along the way. So the regulator originally said, we don't want digital health. This doesn't work for us. The insurer originally said, we're not happy to pay for it. And the patient was sitting there saying, I don't want to use it. And now you've had those three conversations change along the way. How has that directly or indirectly impacted your businesses, positively, negatively, even in terms of competition? And how has it impacted, the end consumer or the patients? There's, 1.5 billion people across Middle East and Africa, and we're catering to them all and trying to improve healthcare, access, quality, and cost for them. So how has this really moved the needle on the industry? Positive, negative? Is there now a bubble? Your thoughts. Nadine, why don't you start?
I think what's been clear, and obviously COVID was a very difficult time for everyone around the world, but what it has done, it has fundamentally catalyzed the change that we will never go back to. I mean, it's been a change that's been needing to happen for some time, like you described. Everyone was kind of sitting on the fence, are we going to do this or not? And COVID really pushed everyone to realize that this is the way forward and this is the way for scale. So in a sense, I guess I don't want to use the word positive, but it was a silver lining out of that experience. And I'm sure a lot of people whose businesses were around catering healthcare to patients accelerated significantly, as did we. The reality, though, is that, as I said earlier, healthcare is complex. You described it as well. You end up always having a trifecta of 2 or 3 decision makers that drive forward. And it's very hard usually at times to get them all aligned on a direction. So COVID obviously catalyzed that and moved everyone in that direction. What that means for us is that there's a willingness and an openness now to adopt and change very, very traditional models of business. And to the point that you made about, regional disparity, or do we find variance across different regions? We saw a willingness perhaps to adopt at pace in more developing areas and developed, and they drove and almost showed the way to more developed countries. So that kind of reverse innovation becomes very exciting and very interesting. So I think, all the my colleagues on the panel today have been working in areas where they have an opportunity to really leapfrog and demonstrate globally that potential. Yes, payers may be different. Yes, providers may be different. It's different health systems, and that's the complexity of it. But the behavior is the same across any region. And the one final point I would say is, as much as people have this perception that healthcare is better in developed versus developing, I would actually say that variation, for example, in surgical care is a global problem. Whether you're in the US or the Middle East or in Africa or India, it's the same. We have these major, major disparities. So we have an opportunity, and I think that's the perseverance that founders need to have, particularly in healthcare, to keep driving that to show the difference.
So let's hone in on some of the questions. Jalil, who or how do you manage the marketplace dynamics at the early stage? So how do you keep doctors interested but still get to the patients?
So when we started Altibbi, there was no intention to create a marketplace. It was a pure content play. So we created content. We paid some doctors to write content for us. We had a team of writers, and we focused on bringing patients on to read that content. And when we reached a certain stage, we started approaching doctors to participate in contributing in different ways and creating that sort of marketplace. So it was that content that allowed us to have that power of users or numbers of users that would enable us to have some doctors listen to us, not all of them, as you remember. So yeah, I hope I answered that question.
That's great. And then the last question from the chat that we'll take, and I know we have just 5 minutes left. How can we enable access to healthcare innovation in Silicon Valley diagnostics and cure for you and your team and patients to benefit from? I'm assuming you can read it. So from Dr. Osama, I'd love it if each of you had 1 or 2 kind of thoughts on this and shared them. And maybe those could be in conjunction with any closing remarks or advice to founders. Okay, I have to pick on someone. Karim.
Sorry, I didn't get the last question. If you could, I didn't understand. There was a Silicon Valley.
I think what Dr. O is asking is, how can we get the Silicon Valley-based VCs to take a look at the region and really invest in the region? Or he's asking, how can we access healthcare innovation over there and maybe bring that into the region? Answer one or the other. They're both very interesting questions with lots of different answers.
Well, I think the first step really is to, we need a few big success cases here in the region to show VCs in Silicon Valley that there are big opportunities here. And I would say, kind of given the timeline of the startup ecosystem, which, I don't know, according to what I'm seeing, at least in the Middle East, it started anywhere between 2008 and 2012-ish, where, I don't know, around the time Jalil started other really kind of significant companies. I think hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we start to see some significant kind of investments in this sector and possibly even exits. And I think this will entice the VCs. I think the regional VCs have a big role to play in kind of bringing interest from the other side as well. So I think this is also kind of materializing with the maturing ecosystem now. And ultimately, I think it's up to the founders to kind of show that whenever the opportunity emerges, that they are kind of up to the level, and that there are some fantastic teams in the Middle East here that can possibly even produce the same level of quality as startups in Silicon Valley.
Great, thank you. Nadine, any thoughts on that?
I agree a lot with what Karim is saying. You know, clearly it's important to showcase some really great success stories to show what's possible from the region. We always talk about these words, reverse innovation, others, but I think just having a number of, having regional investors not shying away from healthcare because it's complex, because that's tended to be in the past, perhaps some of the approaches that we've seen. The second bit is actually recognizing that ultimately, if we go back to the idea of what the future of healthcare will look like, it'll be digital, it'll be data-driven. What you will see within regions is a lot of diversity, a diversity in data sets, a diversity of information. And these companies may be looking for partnership and collaborations across the globe, Middle East being one region, where that diversity of data set is critical. Because when you're trying to build your algorithms and your trainings, you want to be able to encompass as much of a global patient footprint as possible. And again, I would agree that the investor community has an important role to play in bridging the gap and bringing those relationships across and demonstrating their belief in the region and the belief in founders in the region.
Great, thank you. That's super insightful. Jalil, anything you'd like to add to Dr. Usama's question?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely keep learning from the healthcare innovations in Silicon Valley, especially when it comes to deep tech and the AI solutions that are happening that we learn from. But at the same time, I do invite Silicon Valley healthcare innovators to come learn, not only from the Arab world, but also from emerging market startups that are actually innovating. Maybe not in deep tech, but in the way we deliver healthcare, the way we reach customers, the way we drive utilization. There's a lot that also Silicon Valley can learn from the emerging world as well.
Absolutely, I completely agree. We always talk about how founders in the region actually have it so much harder than founders in the Bay Area. And because of that, they're more resilient, they're more capital efficient, they build sustainable businesses just from the beginning because there isn't all this capital flushing around where, you've been through 10 million, you'll raise another 10. Okay, so last question, a one-word answer from each of you so that we're not late for Tawfiq. We'll wrap up the panel and thank everyone. Who is willing to bring about the most changes in healthcare? Small startups with new technology or the Amazons and Googles of the world? So you got to pick one. Ready? Karim.
Startups.
Jalil?
It's biased, of course, startups.
Nadir? Fantastic. And there you have it. So it's the startups that are going to change healthcare and digital health. Thank you all for such a fantastic and fun panel. I enjoyed it. I hope that everybody else did too. And thank you all for joining us. It's great to have this Techwadi forum online and virtual this year. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.